Hey everybody, welcome into the Fantasy Coffee Break, your number one source for quick fantasy information to get you ready to dominate your league week in and week out. I'm your host, Cody Capola, joined as always by Conan Gruen and Aaron Hale. Today we're going to be looking at streaming defenses for week one. Now, as we start to talk about streaming defenses, you got to understand we're not going after some of these top options that are already going off the board. You're not going to see San Francisco. You're not going to see Chicago. You're not going to see New England. Also, because these top options are off the board, we're not necessarily going to be focusing on the teams shooting for a shutout. Look at the scoring in your systems. Usually what we're going to be trying to focus on is high sack and high turnover totals. That's where you're going to be able to find the most value and the most bang for your buck. Also, you're going to want to take a look probably at some of the rougher rookie quarterbacks or just Dwayne Haskins most weeks. Conan, you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, so as you said, I think one of the top streaming options week in and week out, if they're available on the waiver, will be whoever is playing Washington football team. And week one, that happens to be the Philadelphia Eagles. And they're basically a mid-round, mid-league defense coming in around 15 to 18 in most ADPs and projections and rankings. But for this week one, they're across the board a top 5 defense because they have the delight of facing the Washington football team. And that basically gets it done every week. Whoever's playing them will be in top option. And so a little bit about why is Haskins in 2019, obviously he didn't play the full season and he looked a little rough out there. He looked a little better come end of the season. A little bit better, but he ended the year with a 12.5% sack rate and a 3.4 interception rate, and those were both basically bottom 5 in the league. And even if he improves on those numbers, like a little bit, even like more than a little bit, that team just has no options aside from Terry McLaurin, who is definitely a very good option in that offense. But aside from him, you have a couple hopeful, Antonio Gibson truthers, a lot of those out there. But what will he be able to provide for Haskins? And aside from McLaurin in that wide receiver core, you got, Steve Sims, Dontrell Inman, I think, figures to be their wide receiver 3 right now. And then you got another rookie, Antonio Gandy-Golden. So it's not looking too good. And what did the Eagles do on defense? Oh, they picked up one of the best cornerbacks in the league, and Darius Slay from the Lions, as we talked about on an earlier episode today. And so he can be tasked with covering the top wide receiver option on any team, basically, week in and week out. And that's all the recipe and the ingredients for a good top 5 showing for the Philadelphia Eagles, I think. So I don't know how you can go wrong playing against a team that is just that bad and has that little weaponry on the offensive end. So
that little
what do you
weapon,
got?
Just the one.
Weapon. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you're
Scared
right.
Terry.
I thought you were going to say something bad about Terry, and I was going to have to go over the first rule of Fantasy Coffee Break. We don't say bad things about Terry.
No.
So one thing that we hadn't talked about just yet, and we did mention on the quarterback show, is that, remember, we're not just trying to do this week in and week out. If you have to stream an option every single week at these one positions, you're going to drive yourself crazy. You're going to burn through your priority. We want to try and find options that can continue on week in and week out. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I know this is another one of those weird contrarian picks, going up against the New Orleans Saints. Now, if you only watched the first half of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers season, I get it. Trust me, it was, as a Buccaneers fan, it was rough to be able to watch. But looking at that midpoint, they were one of the top defenses in the league, the number 1 rushing defense in the league as well. Take a look at the young corners. League leader in pass defended. It's going to be 20 passes defended over the course of the season. Carlton Davis, their number 1 corner, 19 passes defended. Jamal Dean, 17 passes defended in only 8 games. and Sean Murphy-Bunting with 8 passes defended and 3 interceptions. Being able to actually predict interceptions, especially against Drew Brees, is incredibly hard. But what I love about these guys is that they have the opportunity to. With Tampa being so stout against the run, you know that Brees is going to have to throw, and that's going to produce more opportunities to get after the quarterback, more opportunities to be able to sack, and hopefully more to be able to pull one of those handful of interceptions that Brees throws every year. Tampa's done it in the past, not on a consistent basis, but I think that this is finally going to be one of those years that you actually see them put the unit together. Now, talking about the front of that defense, that defensive line, you've got JPP and Shaq Barrett on the outside. Yes, NFL sack leader Shaq Barrett. JPP, after his explosive offseason, came back in week 8.5 sacks after breaking his neck in only 10 games. So 14 sack pace. The year before was 12.5 sacks. These are going to be, and I know this is probably shocking, but the best pass rushing tandem in the NFL in 2020. Looking at the interior of the line, we've got Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh. These two are going to be one of the biggest reasons why we're going to have single coverage on the outside. Vita Vea is a monster of a human being, and even though he did struggle coming off of an injury last year, PFF had him at a 86.4 grade for the last 6 weeks, and that includes 91 against Baltimore. And yes, that's the future MVP Lamar Jackson right there. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not going to tell you that Tampa Bay is going to come into New Orleans and put up a top 5 finish. What I am going to tell you is that they're going to be able to put up a low defense 1, so talking in that 10 to 12 range, and then over the next 4 weeks has one of the juiciest matchups you can come. Carolina Panthers, Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Chargers, and Chicago Bears. Last episode, I talked about how great Mitch Trubisky was against those bottom 16 defenses. Well, just as great as he was against the bottom 16, he was equally garbage against the top 16. Los Angeles might be in a possible changeover at quarterback. Mike Williams should still be out for that game, and they will be partially depleted, especially along the offensive line. Drew Lock and the Broncos, I mean, outside of him throwing 200 yards a game and running for his life, he hasn't shown anything yet. And early in this season is probably going to be running for his life again with Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton helping him on the outside. And Carolina, again, same thing that we're talking about in this matchup, one of the worst defenses you can come up against. A bad offensive line and those game scripts that are going to allow for the points that we're going to need. Tampa's probably going to allow a lot of points in this game. I won't back away from that. But between forced fumbles and sacks, should have the opportunity to be able to come in and give you a rock-solid performance, and then you can ride him out for the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, good point. Definitely need to get that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, especially after those matchups that you just listed. You can't beat it. So one of those matchups was the Broncos, and my team is Tennessee Titans, the matchup for the Broncos for Monday night. Big thing when I say that is Monday night football for a second-year quarterback, Drew Lock, the 29th best quarterback in points per game last year. Again, you mentioned it, Cody, 200 yards per game. It's just not going to cut it. And I think those bright lights are something that's going to affect him. I do think Tennessee Titans have the greater experience. They unfortunately beat these guys under the bright lights last year. I hate to admit it, but it's the truth. And they also added some additional weapons. Jadeveon Clowney, for once, I know he just got added, so he may not be implemented too much for the first week, but that's still a scary option. You got to account for that. He's one of the best pass rushers we have in this game. Jeffrey Simons coming in. He was there last year. He's growing into that role. He's becoming a brute force on that defense as well. Also, similar to what you said with Tampa Bay, taking in consideration of their next matchups for the upcoming weeks, they do play Jacksonville next week. So, I mean, that's one matchup you want to have as well. So, they're only rostered about 13% across all platforms. So, I think that's one of those sleeper defenses that you definitely want on your team for sure.
All right, guys. Well, that was the fantasy coffee break for today. Hopefully, you're able to lock up one of these defenses for week 1, and we'll see you with tight end next.